This evening, he is the president of Euro Pacific Capital, a company that he purchased in the late 90s, made his money at that time warning people to get out of tech stocks before the bust came. More recently, his claim to fame on cable news commentary and in his book Crash Proof, he warned of the current economic crisis coming well before it happened. For those of you who haven't seen the Peter Schiff was right video, I would suggest you get onto YouTube or schiffforsenate.com and take a look at his commentary in 06 and 07 talking about the coming crisis. That fame kind of led to a grassroots effort, a successful one, to convince Peter to run for the Senate, so that hopefully going forward we'll have somebody up in Washington who actually understands economic fundamentals and can help us deal with the fiscal problems that we are currently in. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Peter Schiff.
It's a nice sized room. Too bad we couldn't fill it. I understand it is Good Friday, so maybe a few people are at church. Anyway, so I've been asked to speak about 10 minutes on the economy, which is fine. It's one of my favorite topics. But I am running for the United States Senate, as you know, and I will be available following these presentations in the refreshment room. And I will be happy to answer anybody's questions when it comes to the race, my strategy, what my opinions are on any of the issues. So, feel free to approach me and ask me any questions. Anyway, let me talk a little bit now about what's happening in the U.S. economy. Again, we had some more economic data that came out today from March non-farm payrolls, and the markets were closed today, so we didn't have as much of the fanfare as we normally have when the government releases some economic data. But, we created 160,000 jobs during the month, and the consensus on Washington and on Wall Street is that this is great news. The economy is finally recovering. The stimulus is working. And, the worst is behind us. This is all complete nonsense. The people who are saying this, these are the same people who I was debating in 2006 and 2007, who said everything was great back then. They couldn't see this disaster coming, even though it was staring them right in the face. Just because the GDP is expanding, just because we're creating jobs, doesn't mean we're out of the woods. In fact, if you look at the jobs that we created, about 50,000 jobs were census workers. Now, the country would be better off if we didn't have to hire the census workers. In fact, the economy is in such bad shape, I think we should try to find a way to have an emergency. I know it's in the Constitution, but maybe we can postpone the census for a year or two because we can't afford it. Remember, we have to hire all these census workers, and we got to pay their salaries. They don't produce anything. And the problem is, the government is broke. We have to borrow the money to pay the census workers, so now we got to pay interest on that money. In addition, almost all the jobs that were created were in the service sector. About 100 of the 160,000 jobs, like 120,000 in the service sector. Well, the problem is we have too many people working in the service sector. That's part of the major economic imbalances that underlie our economy. What we need is more people working in the goods production sector, in manufacturing. We need to be increasing manufacturing jobs by hundreds of thousands a month. But that's not happening. And the reason that's not happening is because government is not letting it happen. The stimulus is interfering with the market or the economy from being rebalanced. We need to move away from services to goods production. We have to move away from spending and consumption to saving and investing. That's the only way to get out of this crisis. But rather than allowing market forces to correct our problems, because politicians feel that the short-term pain is bad in politics, they're going to do whatever they can to try to postpone that pain. The problem is, it only makes it worse. That's exactly what we did when George Bush first came into office and inherited the recession that followed the bursting of the NASDAQ bubble and the events of September 11th. What the country needed earlier in this decade was a recession. Now, I said we needed a recession not because recessions are pleasurable or because we like them. We needed them because that's the only way that economies can correct for all the mistakes that are made in the phony booms that always precede them. The problem is the politicians love the booms because the voters love them, because they get something for nothing. During the 1990s, the boom was tech stocks and internet stocks. They were all going up. Everybody got rich. You didn't have to do your homework. You didn't have to buy quality stocks. You just bought something with a .com on it and watched it go straight up. And all sorts of companies were being created that produced no profits, that had they weren't even viable business models, yet all of a sudden they were sporting billion-dollar market caps. And we had a lot of malinvestments. A lot of companies were created who rented office space, they hired workers, they attracted capital. None of these companies ever should have existed. And of course, when the bubble finally burst and we realized what fools we were, right, when all the monetary alcohol wore off and we woke up with a hangover, we had to fix these mistakes. And the process of fixing these mistakes is a recession. And, of course, the politicians hate the recession because the voters don't like it. Rather than being honest with the voters and saying, look, this is what we got to do, right? Look, we made all these mistakes in the 1990s, and, of course, why did we make all those mistakes? It was because of monetary policy. The Federal Reserve kept interest rates much too low during the 1990s. Every time there was a problem anywhere in the world, Alan Greenspan came to the rescue with cheap money. And that cheap money inflated the stock market bubble. That was the problem. Bubble burst, and what does George Bush do? He he stimulates the economy. He slashes interest rates back down. Greenspan slashes interest rates back down to 1%, and Bush cuts taxes, which was good, but unfortunately they increased government spending, and so we ran deficits. So we ran these Keynesian deficits, and we dropped interest rates down to 1%. And we succeeded in stopping the recession. Right? Bush always bragged about the fact that recession in 2001 or 2002 was the shallowest recession on record. And it was, because it wasn't really a recession. During that time period, we had record car sales and record home sales. But where did Americans get money to go on this giant shopping spree? They got it from the Federal Reserve. They got it from these cheap rates. That's when we had 0% financing for the first time of automobiles. That's where we invented the nothing down mortgage, the adjustable rate mortgage, the interest-only mortgage. All this was a direct function of the stimulus of 2001, 2002, which was designed to short-circuit the recession that we needed to fix the mistakes in the economy. And of course, what were the consequences of that? Well, we had a housing bubble, and we bankrupted our lending institutions. We bankrupted our automobile companies. Is it any wonder that General Motors and Chrysler both went bankrupt? It was because the Federal Reserve conned them into loaning money to people to buy cars that couldn't really afford to pay for them. And it was their financing arms that ultimately blew up. And of course, we bankrupted our financial institutions. We had to spend all this money bailing out firms that wouldn't have been vulnerable had the Fed not juiced everybody up with cheap money. And of course, once that bubble burst in the housing market, which of course was much bigger than the bubble in the stock market, now we're in the same situation. And George Bush leaves office, and Barack Obama comes in, and he promises to change things. And he proceeds to do every single thing wrong that George Bush did, except he does it on a grander scale. Instead of running $300 billion budget deficits a year, we're running budget deficits of $1.5 trillion a year. The government is now spending so much money, we're almost spending $4 trillion a year right now on a federal level. It's more than twice what we spent when George Bush took office. The government has doubled in size. If anyone wants to know why the economy is in such bad shape, that's why. The government is so big, it's crushing the economy beneath its weight. And Ben Bernanke, who followed Alan Greenspan, what is he doing? Did he learn anything from the mistakes that were made under Greenspan? Well, probably not, because he was his right-hand man making all those mistakes. So he continued the same failed policy. Instead of slashing interest rates to 1%, he brought them all the way to 0. And they're still 0. Meantime, what is all this doing? What is this deficit spending? What is this cheap money doing? It is undermining a real recovery. All we're doing now is going deeper into debt to spend more money that we don't have, buying products we can't afford, trying to reflate a busted bubble economy.